Gather round the campfire, friends. I've got a creepy tale for you. This is the chilling saga of a vicious serial killer dubbed the Freeway Phantom. It was a warm spring night in Washington, D.C. in 1971, when 13-year-old Carol Spinks set off on what should have been a quick errand to the corner store. But little did Carol know that on this fateful night, she would vanish without a trace into the hands of a killer who prowled the streets searching for vulnerable young victims. Carol came from a bustling household of 9 siblings being raised by their hard-working single mom. That evening, Carol's teenage sister Valerie wanted some goodies from the store, but didn't want to walk herself. She pestered Carol until Carol finally relented and headed out the door alone into the darkness. But Carol never returned. As the hours tick by with no sign of Carol, her mom, Alantine, grows more distraught. She searches the neighborhood and checks in with Carol's friends, but no one has seen her. After 3 agonizing days, young Carol's lifeless body is discovered discarded next to a highway. She had been viciously attacked and strangled, but the most sinister revelation was that Carol had been kept alive and captive before her murder. This killer was no ordinary psycho, but a ruthless hunter playing twisted games with his prey. In the weeks after Carol's murder, the streets of D.C. grew uneasy. Parents held their daughters tight, warning them not to walk alone at night. Most figured Carol's killer was some random drifter who had moved on to torment some other town. But they couldn't have been more wrong. The monster had only just begun his twisted game. 2 months after Carol's death, 16-year-old Darlenia Johnson vanishes from her home. Though her mom begs police to investigate, they brush her off, saying Darlenia probably just ran off. But 11 agonizing days later, Darlenia's battered body is discarded along the highway, just like Carol Spinks. She too was abducted and held captive before her murder. It's clear now the streets of D.C. are being stalked by a serial killer prowling for young victims. The police and public dub the madman the Freeway Phantom. Panic descends on the city as parents fear their daughters could be next. But, mysteriously, weeks pass without any further attacks. Maybe the Phantom had moved on or been locked up, but these hopes are short-lived. On a summer night in July, 10-year-old Brenda Crockett leaves her house to run a quick errand and never makes it back. The next morning, her strangled body is found, confirming the Phantom still roams free. Fall arrives, and parents keep daughters on lockdown, hoping to evade the Phantom's grasp. But he sets his sights on 12-year-old Nina Yates, who vanishes walking just 1 block home from the store. Nina's body soon turns up discarded, just like all the others. 6 months later in March, the Phantom strikes again, snatching 17-year-old Diane Williams at a bus stop on her way home. Luring girls walking alone at night was this psycho's sinister pattern. The city lives in fear as cops fruitlessly try tracking down leads on this slippery psycho. But the Phantom leaves few clues besides the battered bodies left in his wake. Oddly, after Diane's September murder, the Freeway Phantom goes dormant again. As weeks turn to months with no further attacks, folks wonder, could the Phantom have perished himself? But rumors spread of a caller taunting the grieving families, whispering, "I killed your daughter," through the phone. Though the leads go nowhere, one thing is clear. The Phantom's reign of terror is far from over. A year later, in November 73, the Phantom's eerie silence is broken again in the most daring attack yet. 18-year-old Brenda Woodward heads off one evening to her night classes at Cardozo High, never arriving at home. Days later, her stabbed and strangled corpse turns up by the highway. But this time, a bone-chilling note is left with Brenda's body. Scrawled in Brenda's own handwriting, the message brazenly taunts cops' fruitless efforts to catch the killer who calls himself the Freeway Phantom. This psycho was playing twisted games, not just with victims, but with the cops trying to catch him. investigators' suspicions grew that the Phantom knew his victims personally. The girls likely trusted this villain enough to willingly enter his clutches. A senior officer, Detective Davis, discovers a violent offender named Robert Askins, whose crimes echo the Phantom's. Askins worked near where the victims lived. He knew those neighborhoods. And most chilling, Askins was arrested for using a fake cop routine to abduct and assault women, posing as a detective to lure trusting prey. That was the perfect ruse for the Phantom. Detective Davis tries convincing others that Askins fits the bill perfectly. His timeline matched the murders, his car matches eyewitness reports, and he had a tendency to force victims to write notes like those found on Brenda's corpse. But with lack of witnesses and DNA testing not yet invented, the hunch isn't concrete enough to tie frail-looking Askins to hulking Phantom descriptions. Now, Davis was sure he'd found his man in Askins, but with the court of law requiring hard proof, the Phantom could walk free. So Davis decides to take justice into his own hands. One cold winter night in 1975, Davis lies waiting in the shadows by Askins' home. As Askins' car rolls down the snow-lined street, Davis intercepts him. He forces Askins from the car into an abandoned alley, giving the cowering creep one chance to confess his Phantom legacy. But Askins only spits at Davis and shouts his innocence. Davis raises his weapon and asks if Askins has any last words to atone for the teenage girls' lives he took. But Askins stands firm, shouting, "Not by your hand or any man's will I be judged unfairly." A gunshot slices the darkness. Askins falls dead into a filthy puddle, the Phantom mysteries dying along beside him. Detective Davis buries the tattooed body deep in the woods. He returns home and tells his wife the Phantom case is closed for good. Now, not a soul knew truth of that violent alley confrontation, besides Davis's own burdened conscience. He took satisfaction believing Askins paid deservedly for the Freeway Phantom crimes, regardless if hard proof existed or not. For the next 30 years, Davis keeps quiet, believing Askins died the Phantom's rightful death. But by the early 2000s, guilt gnaws at Davis. What if his rash vigilante justice has punished the wrong man? DNA testing had come miles by then, and Davis knows if biological proof still exists tying Askins or any other convict to the actual Phantom slayings, the families deserve that closure for sure proof. So, 30 years later, Davis comes forth recounting the off-books confrontation with Askins. He presents the burial site, hoping samples may show if that body tied to Phantom case evidence. But the decayed corpse holds no intact DNA, surviving 3 decades rotting 6 feet under. Another now retired officer, Detective Jenkins, picks up the DNA trail, hoping to finally ID the infamous Freeway Phantom, perhaps still lurking free. She scours evidence lockers seeking biological clues, but proof on the infamous murders has mysteriously vanished. You heard right. The Phantom's DNA trail and all forensic clues have disappeared into thin air. Without fingerprints or strands of hair, the Phantom's true face can never be reconstructed, nor his identity confirmed. Perhaps the Phantom himself slithered unseen into evidence rooms to dispose of those damning bio clues. Or maybe a crooked cop still walks amongst the force. And so, the legendary monster known as the Freeway Phantom eludes identification even decades later. The trail has gone cold with critical evidence lost and suspects like Askins long gone. With DNA clues vanished like vapor and the killer's eerie letters framed as artifacts of an unsolved legend, this Phantom's identity and wrested remains may never emerge from the cold case mists.